Peter Hill Explains, where I invite you to join the science teaching conversation with me about unusual teaching techniques. I'm just going to talk about a few teaching techniques which aren't used usually by the majority of teachers, and reflect on the fact whether an unusual teaching technique is necessarily wrong, or are these specialist techniques appropriate for the right teacher and the right group of students? Is that a better thing, or are there sort of teaching techniques which you sort of transport across into different mediums, different scenarios? And the first thing I'll talk about is wanting to bolt teaching teaching assets onto podcasts. Now, I'm beginning to think that with each podcast, and I'll do the podcast here, I should produce a series of questions, a multiple choice question and a comprehension question. Not for the readers, of course, but for other people going through, so the podcast can become a teaching asset. And thinking of how to do that, there's a sort of I don't know, I sort of can imagine technology development as a sort of building a cart to go along a road. It goes along a road, and at a certain point the road goes off in different directions. It goes down to a valley, a village, a mountain. It goes off in different directions, and having the cart is not necessarily the best way forward. So what I'm thinking here is that there's a series of requirements to push the podcasts, as I'm doing at the moment, into YouTube and Facebook, and they've all got their own little proclivities. So it really turns out that Facebook has a different download engine to YouTube, so you can't actually just pop a YouTube in your Facebook page, and the Facebook page, it's got a sort of different link and structure, and then YouTube's got again a different link and structures. It's critical to YouTube is putting the tags, correct amount of tags, and the actual information that you put into YouTube is slightly different, and is something which really has to be put on at a later date. So what I'm thinking of is creating an asset wrapper around the podcast, and what goes off that I can actually send a podcast off to a friend or something, get them to actually proofread and think and process some of the multiple choice assets and some of the writing stuff, and then that goes back and relinks and covers with your Facebook and with your YouTube link. So I'm just trying to think of it. So what would happen is that you'll have multiple choice link, and that would take you to basically a Google Doc page, a website, so you can actually write a little bit more of a lesson plan associated with the actual podcast, sort of develop that. So I've just got to really concentrate on and work out how that is done, and there's sort of all these issues. This is on the software front. There's all these issues that the problem with going to Google Doc page is that it's hard to automate. You don't want to actually, you want to press on the YouTube, I've got to really think about how it's done. So basically you want a lesson plan associated with every podcast, a simple multiple choice question up with the podcast, because that's a good symbol there, and then a lesson plan linked to every podcast. So I've got to work out if you've got a Google web page published, if you can just click on it and edit, if you're an author of that particular publication, whether you get the edit icon to go up. I don't know if everyone can follow it. There's just, I don't know, I imagine it as a series of nodes and data going between different nodes, and it doesn't go. That is unusual. This is not a usual thing to do, and there's a big question about how you handle unusual stuff. It's not non-conforming, it's just not usual. The usual teachers don't normally go on an education fest of producing 5 or more podcasts going ahead. Now, the RSL, which is the Returned Servicemen League, is an interesting group because they're not haven't got themselves committed into the education space, so they're probably a little bit more adaptable. And what I'd like to do, I'm getting permission to read their articles as they come out, because they're quite good comprehension articles, and seeing if I can actually get the RSL to bundle education assets with it. And I think they will. There's these what you call dormant assets. That is, you have anemic assets, social assets. So you have, say the overall education department. It has a political thing which sort of filters out expertise coming into it, interaction with it. So that really means that there's a sort of an anemia of ideas and innovation coming in, whereas you have areas of dormant social assets, sort of like up in the mountains. You've got all the professionals who go down into Sydney and go up in the evening. It's sort of a dormitory area. There's sort of these dormitory suburbs with a lot of expertise sitting around. So as you walk down the streets, you'll bump into people with all this expertise, but it's not actually been pushed forward. And it's sort of the RSL is in that zone. There's got a lot of retired people and academics associated with it, because there's just been so many people roped in over the years. And it's sort of linked in a very interesting way to, like there's an Australian Army Journal, and there's a culture of publishing and research to go. So perhaps this is a way to go. So this is a point, sort of looking at this as an unusual thing. You have to say, look, this is unusual, and there may be these high-level strategic things to go through. Now, I just want to run through some of the unusual sort of computer sciencey things that I do, and like almost every technique that you use has a plus point and a minus point. So, like if you really haven't understood your technique if you think it's all positive and there's no negative. So I say that up front. So let's just look at the structuring of just lining kids up and getting them into class. The way that I've sort of done MBAs in business process re-engineering. So no process which I look at is ever perfect. I keep on saying, oh look, you can work this out. And so you've got this process of kids going into class, starting the lesson, calling the roll, and all that type of stuff. So what I do is I have a process of kids going into class and getting work. And so what they do is there's a computer printout sheet where I've randomised the seating positions, and they tick their seating position off and go in. So when that's completed, I've got a complete manifest of all people up, and if there's no tick, that's the missing person. Then I do a few checks to check the roll's done, and that's done. And as they go in, they go, and there's a website and a worksheet for every lesson. So they pick up the worksheet and begin quietly working on it. And it's the first questions is to orient them to the actual theme of the lesson. Then we give the theme of the lesson forward. So what happens is while people are coming in, the students are settle down immediately start working. So that's a unusual technique. I don't think teachers, or definitely I've written the LabVIEW program, the computer program which takes the class list, randomizes and applies seating rules to it as you go on. And what's interesting is that for senior kids, they say, look, can we negotiate where we sit? And of course, I just put that in so it's associated. Now, there's a few other unusual things where you've got teachers of different backgrounds. Obviously, if a teacher's been to a teacher training school, they'll pick up that area. But I've been to besides teacher training, I've been to other areas. The Questacon Science Museum, I've been explainer there for a fair number of years at the start, the inception of the museum, and also, and I'm not putting this forward as military training. I think military training, teaching military things, getting people to stand to attention and all that type of stuff, it doesn't work with schools. However, there are certain aspects which definitely do work, and this is actually borrowing a bit from weapons instructions as to actually demonstrating a piece of equipment like a Bunsen burner. You go through the same sequence, and it's a fairly good, strong sequence, and in a certain sense, the knowledge to, sort of panning back, the knowledge to actually put the questions at the end of the podcast is also important. At the end of a military lesson, you ask comprehension questions to validate your learning. You obviously can't do this in podcasts, although eventually I'll automate e-learning resources to go in with it. So I think once I've got the questions up, I can then automate resources across with that. But yeah, so you state what the lesson's about, or the piece of equipment is about. You identify the parts of the equipment, and then watch now a complete demonstration of blah blah blah. Watch it right through. Then you explain in bits and pieces, and then at any other points, are there any questions? You have questions there, and then get them. Just have a complete demonstration. So one of the tips I've picked up is you don't speak while you're demonstrating. The human comprehension, the way they often see in cooking shows that people pick up is that they talk while they're demonstrating. Now, one of the sort of golden rules is that you don't talk while you're demonstrating, because some people are good listeners, other people get overwhelmed, and it's just proven that if you're demonstrating how to light a Bunsen burner or how to set up something, it's there. There's also quick uniform transitions in the classroom, so where you have to get everyone to stand up to look at a bench or a fume hood or a demonstration. I still operate by numbers, and so 1, pens down, 2, stand up behind the seats, 3, come to the forward. So you can eventually, or after a very short time, you can say, we're going to the bench, and without saying any other instructions, just say 1, and the students who aren't paying attention or aren't there are quickly roused, and everyone comes in a particular way. And that transition is particularly good. It's also, in terms of lab safety, we have the situation in one school. We had the bags always stacked outside the room. In this situation, that's not possible. There's bags inside the room. So if you've got bags sitting around the laboratory, it's important to get the seats and things very in, and to get the demonstrations going ahead. There's just a few things using hand symbols to put on your safety glasses, and then if there's sort of two, if you don't have your safety glasses, you have the safety breech to sit down for a certain amount of time. And there's also, again, from the military stuff is where things are put in a particular, you disassemble things, but you put things in a particular position. Now, in terms of lab safety, and that's putting glassware up against a wall. So when you've got a measuring cylinder and you've finished with it, but you've still got it on your bench, you put it up against the wall so it can't. You've got your little bench. These are not free island benches. This is of a particular design where the benches are around the outside. Put them against the wall, and the ability to be able to stop the experiments, turn off the Bunsen burners, and to sit down if there's an accident or anything like that, or a glass breakage. And then there's, I suppose, the asking questions and the timing to get going through. And basically a sequence of a small amount of homework every lesson, a test every lesson. This is just to generate the necessarily performance matrix required. Now, of course, those matrices are not set forward; they tend to vary as I suppose you get hassled going across. So that's a standardised way of trying to get through there. So the overall theme is yes, it's sort of having not access to the actual usual thing. I'm actually trying to just explore the unusual, and so what I'll do is this will be just a real test to me to see if I can actually get a quick multiple choice question coming off, and that will actually just further push me. It's an exercise for me to push me as a teacher. So I'll keep on going. Thanks for listening. Another podcast, another story comes to a close. It's been a pleasure sharing this moment in time with you. May you discover truly amazing things, understand them, and tell others. Thanks for listening.